Across the numerous games that I've played, there have been a few that have sparked my imagination. Their worlds and the stories they tell not only immerse myself in these fabricated settings, but expand the horizons in my creative mind to develop my own stories. Few games have done it more profoundly than the Destiny franchise. On September 2014, Destiny invited players to make their own fates across the Sol system and become legend. It's been 10 years since players were brought into Bungie's new universe. 10 years ago, when players were first resurrected amidst the ruins of the Cosmodrome, fleeing into the walls from an alien race unbeknownst to you, all to salvage a jump ship, venture out into the stars, and ultimately protect the last city of humanity. From the highest of highs to the bottomless wells of lows, Destiny has experienced many successes, challenges, and transformations to reach where it is in 2024. Yet, as Destiny's light and dark saga comes to a close, and shortly begins anew, my passion and interest with the game has waned over the years, to the point where my desire to return has all but faded. What once started as a gradual shift in the game's direction, Destiny's trail has advanced, regressed, and upended many pathways in its voyage across the gaming landscape. And after experiencing the game's triumphs and questionable decisions, my path with the game has run its course. My introduction to Destiny began not from the official trailers, nor from following the cultural and commercial successes of Halo. Rather, it was my brother who first introduced me to Destiny at our local game store. Strangely, upon first glance, the game didn't seem too captivating. I wasn't disinterested, but neither was I reveling in excitement for the game's launch. Considering much of the games I played in my youth were either co-op or story-driven linear games, it's ironic that Halo, and by extension Bungie, were unfamiliar to me. Halo 3 was the first Bungie game I played. Back then, I enjoyed playing along with my brother, side by side as Master Chief and the Arbiter, in a world of alien cultures and saving humanity, oblivious at the time the effects the Halo franchise had on the gaming community and the industry. It was only until I was watching my brother playing Destiny itself a few days after its release did I become intrigued about what the game had to offer. Like many other Guardians that began their stories in the early Destiny days, I was resurrected by Ghost, given a second chance, and blessed by the Traveler to wield its light as a weapon. What once started as a first brush on the world's canvas, Destiny's setting expanded over the course of its main story, side activities, and patrol zones, hiding several mini-stories within its completed canvas. Destiny's launch had a very bumpy start, but in spite of sorely needing improvements, the game managed to induce a sense of curiosity and wonder into my teenage imagination. Only two other games shortly before its time, Minecraft and Skyrim, were able to pry my creative mind and flood it with the same sensations that Destiny achieved. Many afternoons did I spend jumping back into Destiny with an itch to get lost into this game once again. Arguably, outside of Minecraft, Skyrim, and a couple trending multiplayer games in the 2010s, Destiny was probably the only game I was committed to playing consistently for months on end. It's quite ironic then that after my many hours playing the game, I was very evasive of partaking in some of the game's most exciting and demanding activities, from its exotic quests to raids, nightfalls, and much later in the piece, dungeons. Yet, such challenging activities contain some of the most diverse and abstract environments and art directions you'll come across. With The Dark Below and the House of Wolves, Destiny's first minor expansions, Destiny belatedly found its footing. The game wasn't fully complete in certain areas, but it was shaping up into a game with much success. It was then with the release of The Taken King, Destiny's first major expansion, that it took a major leap across all aspects of the game. From a campaign with clear characters, motives, and stakes, to major improvements across the PvE and PvP experiences, the direction Destiny was going had been made clear. the canvas had grown larger. Lore entries like the Books of Sorrow fleshed out the world's characters, systems, and concepts. The side quests detailed the immediate aftermath of Oryx's arrival, and some of them planted the seeds that later shaped the narratives of Destiny's future stories. Just as Destiny 1 captured my intrigue with the world, The Taken King amplified that even further, as I began expressing a deeper appreciation for the artists at Bungie who worked to create Destiny's unique art direction. This feeling continued across into Destiny 1's final year with the release of Rise of Iron and The Age of Triumph. Although smaller in size compared to The Taken King, Rise of Iron continued to fuel my passion in the game as the protagonist was requested once more to protect the City of Humanity from their infamous adversaries. Capping off Destiny 1, the Age of Triumph update brought together all these past years of Destiny into a singular complete package of the game. Seeing some of Destiny 1's mysteries wrapping up and creating new ones to explore in Destiny 2 felt rewarding and satisfying. By this point, the canvas had been fully detailed, while spots around the gaps and edges left opportunities for further developments in the world's narrative. I was satisfied with the time I invested in Destiny 1. After the game's 3-year cycle, Destiny's future looked bright as it showed what this game had to offer. Nearly 3 years to the date of Destiny's initial release, Destiny 2 beckoned gamers once more to enter the world of Destiny. By this time, I was more aware of Bungie's previous successful games across the Halo franchise. My investment into the first game had been high, as I was feeling that eagerness to step back into the role of a Guardian with Destiny 2. However, contrary to what the community had perceived, Destiny 2 in many ways mimicked the bumpy launch Destiny 1 suffered. Whereas Destiny 1 fixed many of the flaws during its cycle, the immediate release of Destiny 2 seems to disregard all that completely and go back to ground zero. In addition, Bungie's focus towards attracting more casual players had, good motives aside, perhaps jeopardized the initial Destiny 2 experience for many of Destiny's players. This isn't to say I was dissatisfied with the initial moments of playing Destiny 2, nor that Destiny 1 was perfect as it was when it first launched. Destiny 2 inclusions of ledge climbing, additional side quests, class abilities, and new enemy units had brought some extra changes to the gameplay of Destiny. In ways, both titles upon their releases had different strengths and faults when comparing them against each other. Even with the story's non-consequential flaws and overly light-hearted tone, the Red War campaign had managed to tell a complete story that I personally enjoyed playing through. A story that finally explored more about the Cabal, which were more or less in the background in the first game, with a clear objective and cast of characters. The new settings, lore entries, and the post-credits cutscene managed to maintain that sense of wonder, trying to determine what was going to happen next. In spite of this, however, my energy playing with the game had drained only a month after its launch. Perhaps franchise fatigue finally crept in, or the game's post-campaign activities didn't seem enticing, which ultimately pulled me away from the game. It wasn't until over a year later when Forsaken, Destiny 2's next major chapter, brought my attention back into the game. Similar to how The Taken King righted the ship for Destiny 1, Forsaken remedied many of the flaws plaguing Destiny 2 at the time. Most notably, its return to a darker narrative, gameplay improvements, and secrets across the DLC's 2 locations recaptured some of that essence of Destiny 1 in its days. The game's sandbox and narrative had, for the most part, been a step back into the right direction for the future of the game's development. There were some gripes I had with the way it approached certain lore entries, but as a whole, I was satisfied with the experience of the Forsaken campaign. It was at this point that I also played the Curse of Osiris and Warmind DLCs for the first time, and, well, the differences in quality were rather apparent. Forsaken was also the year where Bungie introduced Seasons, short updates that focused on various additions to both PvE and PvP areas with a thematic element to it. The next 2 years after Forsaken, Destiny properly began telling its light and dark arc, with Shadowkeep and Beyond Light. In a way, Shadowkeep shared similarities with Rise of Iron, with a shorter narrative and a return to a reprised location. The main difference, however, was their executions. While certain areas of the campaign fueled my inner creative mind once again, the activities had become underwhelming and the ending was rather abrupt. Fast forward to 2021, the results of Beyond Light had a similar feeling. From roaming across the icy landscapes of Europa, to reading about the creation of the Exos and their maker, Beyond Light had once again instilled my developing mind with inspiration and intrigue about the universe of Destiny. The seasons that followed Beyond Light had also taken new leaps in improving the game's story, with the Vex network to Presage and finding allies in the enemies of humanity. This new inspiration was overshadowed by the Beyond Light's ordinary campaign and rather broken stasis, Destiny's first darkness subclass. The DLC wasn't horrendous, but neither did it reach the expectations from prior expansions. Personally, its criticisms were only worsened by the recent additions of the DCV and Sunsetting. As a way to combat the growing size of the video game and power creep, Bungie had decided to create a Destiny content vault, an act of removing a significant portion of the game, including rendering most weapons in the game useless. The justifications for removing stuff you paid for outright, no matter how they were articulated, are disagreed with completely. The game had steadily introduced more elements of FOMO throughout, from its seasonal events to the rotating roster of items at its microtransaction store and its seasons, but the act of vaulting the game's activities had only exacerbated this FOMO mentality, and the rush to complete everything the game continued to provide had now become equivalent to the trendy games that embraced this idea. Psychologically, it felt like every story beat, activity, item, or destination suddenly had an expiry date on them. Yet, in spite of this, I persisted playing. Whether it was from an urge to know more or out of a duty to endure the setback, I still cannot determine. But a part of myself that once had a deep appreciation for the game in its earlier years had been lost. Many game sessions gradually became very routine and exhausting, playing just for the sake of playing, feeling like the game was something else entirely. It wasn't surprising then when I initially pondered the ramifications of the Destiny content vault on the game today. A wedge was driven straight into the game itself, splintering the story in particular into a multitude of pieces. With all of the campaigns and most activities from the Red War to later Forsaken permanently ripped from the game, compounded with the removal of the already temporary seasons and the ambiguous new light tutorial, the barrier to entry for new players had become significantly higher and more confusing. My consistent activity with the game's news and updates was the only reason why I wasn't as affected by this initially. However, I later came to realize the extent of this vaulting soon enough. It was at the release of Season of the Lost that my brother returned to playing the game. Since Destiny 1, I wished of a way to play this game with him together, like how we played many games in our earlier childhoods. Evidently, the monkey's paw had curled. Getting launched into activities at random, to lacking direction on where to go and what's happening, the game's ceiling continued ascending, and it was only trying to play this with him, answering questions about what's happened, that I realized how much harder the barrier to entry was in this game, let alone even returning to it. It was within 2022 where Destiny began its final acts to the game's saga with the Witch Queen. Players were once more thrust into stopping an enemy before they endangered humanity, but the results were surprisingly better than expected. For one, the campaign had a harder difficulty mode, which, coupled with the new Hive Guardians, allowed for a more tense, enjoyable experience in the game. The story's antagonist, Savathun, had finally entered the spotlight after being in the shadows since 2017. The Witch Queen also finally put a face to the darkness, the Witness and its disciples, which, although created some intrigue and fascination with Destiny's darker characters, eventually created mixed feelings in some areas of the game's universe. In addition, its world space, art direction, and soundtrack had again ignited that same wonder of the game's universe. The Witch Queen achieved a narrative that was complete, engaging, and fulfilling. Across the seasons that followed, Destiny's gameplay loop had begun taking my enjoyment from the game again. It was only on the eve of Destiny's penultimate chapter, with experiencing the finale of Season of the Seraph, that it felt like things were at long last looking good for Destiny. And it really felt like it. The highs from the Witch Queen, the surreal but unsettling sensation after seeing the Traveler depart Earth, the marketing material from Lightfall had seemed like what was next would be a thrilling experience. Yet, like a great many times before, what goes up for Destiny always comes crashing down. Upon beginning Lightfall's campaign, it was clear to me that something was off about it. Instead of answering questions and putting the pieces together, Destiny's penultimate expansion had in fact achieved the opposite. Its new setting and MacGuffin felt thrusted onto the game's lore that not only posed the wrong questions to ask, but also disjointed the flow of the campaign. Even at the end of Lightfall's story, I still was left wondering about what happened. The few redeeming qualities in Lightfall, like Strand, Tormentors, and the art and music for the most part, were unfortunately not enough to keep me invested with the game. My interest with Destiny suddenly felt severed. The franchise fatigue that had slowly been accumulating was amplified after Lightfall's poor reception. The Destiny that I once remembered had gone. Following the months of Lightfall, I remained distant from the franchise. Briefly did I return to the new seasons, but left just as quickly as they seemed hollow. Only Season of the Witch of Lightfall's seasons had kept me intrigued. With an intriguing concept with well-established characters, that small spark of the Destiny imagination was trying to come back. However, the finale of the seasonal story had once more extinguished that feeling of curiosity, and I left it behind for a great many months. Lightfall's impact across the gaming community was also favoured poorly, compounded by the meaningless grind, silent communication, and an eventual first round of layoffs. It had created a player base with apathy, and a series of events that would leave the game in perhaps the worst state it's ever been. Eventually, Bungie revealed the finale to the Light and Dark saga, The Final Shape. When I first watched it, I was quite whelmed by the look. With the downturn of events that transpired in the months that passed, and the constant pendulum that Destiny was eternally chained to, it was quite easy in that moment to dismiss it for what it was. Although as 2024 approached, and more promo videos showcased more of the expansion, I couldn't help but become intrigued. It was in weeks before the Final Shape released that I decided to return to the universe of Destiny once more, and eventually determined to experience one final journey. Almost 10 years from viewing Destiny's title screen, The Final Shape, Destiny's conclusion to the Light and Dark saga, had approached. Yet, loading into The Final Shape for the first time felt different. The usual excitement and enthusiasm for anticipating the newest Destiny update was instead filled with ambivalence. Cautious optimism brooded as my mind was conflated. On one side, there was still a part of me in that moment yearning to experience the final burst of imagination that the Destiny series had instilled in me many times in the past. But the game's direction and mismanagement over the years had left me permanently distant. When I hovered over my Guardian, I came to understand my time with Destiny was ending, and I wanted to make sure that I enjoyed the last stretch of the journey Destiny had taken me on. Considering what transpired over the past several months, the Final Shapes narrative had, for me, served what it intended to do. Amidst the face of finality, it told a journey of perseverance and courage, as the allies who've been with the protagonist aid you in hopes of saving everything. The differences between this and Lightfall were night and day. The scenery, soundtrack, and surrounding themes of the narrative tapped into that sense of wonder and, quite prominently, nostalgia. The desire to re-experience those sensations within Destiny's world spaces one last time. What's more, the Final Shapes harder campaign, prismatic subclass, and the Dread faction had all amounted to a more satisfying playthrough of the Final Shape. It isn't to say the Final Shape was perfect in that sense. With where it was at, the story would have felt quite out of place for newcomers entering the game. Neither did the new systems reinvent the wheel with Destiny's core gameplay. After completing the campaign, the story wasn't, of course, concluded. A week later, the race for the world's first on the newest raid led the way to a new 12-man excision activity, where the Witness would be finally defeated. It was in this last moment that, running around with 11 other Guardians and the allies who have followed you over the years, I've perhaps experienced that final sense of peace and joy with the game. At long last, Guardians made their own fate and became legend. Despite this finale, I was already aware that my time in the game was running short. Echoes, the first episode began, part of a supposed revamp to the game's previous seasons, and with my remaining intrigue to the game, I tried to see what it's all about. At least until it was time gated by the week. I realized then that ultimately, the same Destiny 2 that had worn me down was still there. My experience with the Final Shape was a fleeting opportunity to escape into Destiny like I once did. With that time come and gone, what remained was my previous sense of weariness and the time to switch off Destiny. It's been over 2 months since I've experienced my last Destiny session. Although I've still been enraptured by the game's music, lore, and artistic direction on a near daily basis, the call to return into the game of Destiny has faded away. On the cusp of Destiny's 10th anniversary, when I was reflecting on my decade-long journey with the game, I was struck with an epiphany. After all this time, Destiny's successes, tribulations, and hardships, why did I stay with the game? What compelled me to continue with the IP despite all the drama and mishaps the game has been through? Was it the heavy feeling of sunk cost fallacy? Or did curiosity of wanting to know what's next for the game, both in its story, gameplay, and the franchise, propel me to stick around to the end? Whilst they both no doubt played roles in keeping me invested in the game, there was a manner of factors, I suppose. For one, getting brought into a brand new IP and learning about all the new things along the way was something that seemed different, but captivating. All the other IPs I enjoyed were already established, so seeing the world of Destiny emerge over the span of a decade was something that felt special. As the game grew and expanded over the years, it felt like you were growing alongside it. From intrigue and awe to fascination, annoyance, curiosity, weariness, disbelief, apathy, nostalgia, and finally solace. Destiny has evoked in me all these states and perhaps more. Not every one of these qualities is desirable to have when experiencing anything, especially with a video game, but they each served a greater purpose into how my perspectives changed with the franchise, but also my life over those years. Destiny came out at the perfect time in my life. Going through adolescence is one of the most life-altering events you experience, mentally, physically, philosophically. You begin the steps of finding yourself, your passions, aspirations, inspirations, and beliefs as you transition from teenage years into adulthood. Destiny wasn't just one of these games to escape to after coming home from school, it was also a map of sorts. Even as I entered adulthood, Destiny has imparted in me its greater idea of courage. Destiny's tenets of the general path that constitutes a guardian is reflective of the journeys that we experience should we desire them. A life involving discomfort and difficult adversities that, if overcome, compel your life with a greater purpose and satisfaction. Devotion, bravery, and sacrifice. Where crisis has associated itself with every problem in the modern world, and uncertainty looms everywhere, Destiny's message of forging your own path and standing defiant against fates being imposed on you has been a highly valuable lesson to leave with. Evidently, it made me take a deeper appreciation to the worlds and stories, arts and music that shape these fictional creations. I was in my first year of high school when Destiny was released in 2014, and now, being in my early 20s, new frontiers await. So through all the hours on end, playing and replaying through the many activities and locations, I enjoyed the moments I had. But if I were to do it again in some manner, I wouldn't. I did what I wanted to do when I began my role as the Guardian back in September 2014. And now, with the Light and Dark saga concluded, having made our own fates and becoming legend, I think it's the right time to move on from the game. As influential the game has been upon my life, the game I once remember has changed, and in some cases, so have I. Since its debut, Destiny has been a goldmine brimming with untapped possibilities, and yet, 10 years later, there's some merit of truth to the saying that Destiny's always struggled to reaching its potential. Moreover, my life, like many adults, has also changed. Reality demands more of my attention, the opportunities to immerse myself into imaginative spaces, Destiny included, has become scarce, and my overall perspective and thoughts on the franchise as a whole has been shaped by adolescence and inner life experiences across the past decade. To clarify, this isn't me signaling that I won't converse with the game in some capacity ever again. Destiny is one of the games that has had such a pivotal role in my life that, in a way, it's become embedded into my creative self. It has been a source of inspiration for me and will likely continue to do so. But with my current thoughts on the IP and its new voyage preparing for departure, it's no doubt a suitable point for me to retreat from the game. Just as the Osmium sisters distanced themselves from Oryx to go on their own paths, so too must I part ways with Destiny for the foreseeable future. Then saith Savathun, "Siblings, listen, we must part ways a while, so that we may grow different." She flies her war moons into the black hole. Her throne becomes distant. Saith Zivarath, "King Oryx, you take up too much space. Your power constrains too many choices. I must go away from you." She flies her war moons away into the night. Her throne is barred shut. Then Oryx was alone. He spent a while in thought, and those thoughts are recorded here.